Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on zero-touch provisioning. Today we have John Mead, Cambium Networks Senior Director of Engineering. So John, when you're ready, you can take it from here.
Perfect, thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today we're going to talk about cnMatrix, and more specifically, we're going to talk about how to onboard cnMatrix with cnMaestro and how that provides for you a truly zero-touch experience. So real quick on the agenda, I am going to steal the first few minutes to go over the roadmap in just the next 3 months or so, let you know what's coming. And then I'm going to go over one of our key features for you, policy-based automation, or PVA. I'm going to talk about how PVA can really help you go towards this zero-touch experience. And then finally, I'll be wrapping it up with an onboarding live demo using cnMaestro and a cnMatrix switch. So let's get started. So our roadmap, cnMatrix roadmap. So here we are, about a month ago, or it's been 2 months now, we just released 2.1.0-R5. This is our first major release since we started shipping. We started shipping back in December. We've had several minor releases since then. 2.1.0 is our first major release that's out, looking really good, really stable. What's coming next is kind of in the December timeframe. We have our 2.2 software release coming out. This is a very important release for us. What we've done is within our cloud management cnMaestro, we've created a view called Enterprise View. This view is going to be used for cnPilot and cnMatrix customers. So today you can do anything you want with cnMatrix via cnMaestro. However, when it comes to configuration, you do the configuration by creating configuration templates, and those templates are downloaded and pushed down from cnMaestro to all the switches in your network. However, in 2.2, we will also be adding a GUI interface for doing your configuration. So anyway, 2.2 will have cnMatrix GUI configuration, just like you have a GUI configuration today for cnPilot. In addition to that, there's some other small features as well, but I won't go into that today. The next big item coming out is in Q1 of next year, we have our release 3.0 coming out. This is mainly a hardware release. We're going to come out with 4 new hardware SKUs for this enterprise switching family, and I'm going to review those really quickly. Our target date is February for that, so we will have inventory in our distribution center in February for all 4 of these SKUs. Okay, so the first SKUs that we're going to be coming out with is a 48-port SKU. Today we have an 8-port, a 24-port, and a 48-port. So on these 48-port SKUs, you'll also have an additional 4 10-gig fiber uplinks, or 4 SFP plus ports. You'll have the same items as you have in the 24-port switch. You have a true out-of-band network management port, a local console port, and a flash stick or a USB port as well. Now with this 48 port, we're going to have 3 models. The first model is your typical 48 port switch that does not support PoE. The second model will be 48 port switch that does support PoE, and in that second model, it has a fixed internal power supply. The power supply it shows here, it's a total wattage of 520 watts. 400 of those watts, maybe a little bit more, 400 watts are dedicated towards PoE to be shared across the 48 ports. The third model is where it gets very interesting. The third model is where we use a removable power supply, and we're going to offer 6 power supplies for you to choose from. 3 AC power supplies and 3 DC power supplies. And which of the 3 will you choose? It depends on how much PoE output power you need. So this 48-port PoE SKU, depending on which switch you buy and which removable power supply you buy, you can have anywhere from 400 watts to 1,000 watts of PoE power. There's a little picture there on the right-hand side that shows you the CRPS unit, or Common Redundant Power Supply Unit. That is an industry standard supply. It is not a proprietary power supply from Cambium. Okay, that's 3 of the new SKUs coming in Q1. The fourth one is our multi-gig switch. So this is the switch where we are going to support 802.3BZ. So what is 802.3BZ? Well, it's a standard that allows you to, instead of 1 gig, it allows 2.5 gig and or 5 gig over the same wiring in your building infrastructure. So if you replace your end devices, let's say your access points with the new 802.11 AC Wave 2 access points or the new 802.11 AX access points, and then you replace the other end of the wire with a switch that supports this technology, you now get more than your standard 1 gig, either 2.5 or 5 gig. That's what the standard is. And the key to that standard is you don't have to redo the wiring in your building. Okay, so what are we building? We're building a hybrid switch. So 6 ports are going to be 802.3BZ capable, and we've designed it so that it will support up to 2.5 gig. So they will still run at 1 gig, they'll still run at 100 meg, but up to 2.5 gig. Now on those same 6 ports for PoE, instead of supporting only 802.3 AF and AT up to 30 watts, we will be supporting 802.3 BT, and that's 4-pair PoE, and we will support, on this switch, we will support up to 60 watts. On some future switches that we have, we'll be supporting up to 90 watts. Anyway, so this is a hybrid switch. We're going to have 8 ports of standard 1 gig RJ45 connectivity with PoE on those ports. We will have the 6 ports that I just described that will go up to 2.5 gig, and then we will also have 2 10 gig fiber uplinks, 2 SFP plus ports. And the key for this new model is to get ready for the wave of 802.11 AX access points that Cambium will also be offering. Okay, so this is kind of a summary of all the switches we will have in Q1. The first 4 switches at the top of this pile here are the switches that we've been selling for almost a year now. The bottom 3 switches are the new models we'll be having out. I only show one version of our PoE, but there's a one PoE version with a fixed power supply and one PoE version with a removable power supply. Okay, so that's a quick snapshot of our roadmap. Now I want to get into what today's webinar is really for, which is to show you how deploying your network and your day-to-day operations. I'm going to exaggerate that point. So not only the initial deployment of your network, but the day-to-day operations of your network. How can that become truly a zero-touch experience? So to start with, I'm going to talk about this feature that we have. It's a really unique feature across all the switches that are available to you out there. Policy-based automation, I call it PVA for short. Okay, so I keep saying zero touch. What is zero touch? Well, zero touch, you ask 10 people this question, you're going to get 10 different answers. Here's my definition of zero touch. Zero touch is a way to automate the configuration so that you don't have to manually configure the switch. So when you do things to the switch, when you initially deploy that switch, there is a minimal amount of configuration you want on that switch. Do you log into the console through COI? Do you manually configure that? Well, that's not zero touch. So is there a way to automate the process of getting that configuration onto your switch? So this configuration for the initial deployment, a few examples, right? So I don't know, let's say you want to create some VLANs on your switch, maybe make all the ports of your switch a member of those statically created VLANs. Which ports are you going to use for your uplink ports, backhaul ports? Maybe you want to create a port channel and do some link aggregation. Now your IP address, do you want to get that automatically through DHCP, or do you want to statically allocate that? So anyway, these are some examples of what you might want to do when you initially deploy your switch. Okay, and how do we do that here at Cambium? Well, we use cnMaestro. When you register with cnMaestro, when the switch first joins the network and it goes through the onboarding process, and I'll show you all of this during the demo. When you go through that onboarding process, cnMaestro will push down this configuration file, which can have all of this static configuration in it. Okay, so there you go, zero touch. You deploy your switch, and this initial configuration that you want on your switch can be automated. However, I feel that that's only half the story of zero touch. Most people, this is what zero touch means to them. So the second half of the story, for me, the most important half, is what about the configuration on the switch that is necessary for your day-to-day operations? For example, day-to-day, you're going to be connecting new devices to your switch. I've listed a few examples: access points, cameras, printers, IoT devices, right? So now you're talking about thousands of different types of devices. So when you connect a device into your switch, very rarely you won't need to configure anything on your switch. Normally you will need to configure something on your switch. Most commonly VLANs. You want that device to be on the right VLAN or VLANs. Maybe some QoS settings, maybe some security settings. Now, not only do you need to touch your switch and configure your switch when you're connecting devices, but also removing devices, equally important. If you have a device connected to port 5 and port 5 is on some, sensitive, highly secure VLANs, when you remove that when you remove the device from port 5, you don't want to leave that configuration sitting there open. For security reasons, you want to remove that configuration. So when you remove devices, you also have to do some configuration on your switch, in this case, removing configuration. It's also nice to keep your configuration on your switch well maintained and cleaned up. So connecting devices, removing devices, or moving devices from one port on one switch to another port on the same switch, or to another port on a different switch. All these examples require you to do some configuration on that switch. So the question here is, for zero touch, how do you automate that type of configuration? And the answer here at Cambium is the feature policy-based automation. So let me go to the next slide, and I'm going to talk about what PVA really is. So PVA are policies. These are user-created policies that will automate the switch configuration and the port configuration, right? So when you plug a device into port 5, there's things you want to configure on the switch, as well as things that you want to configure specific to that port. Now, these policies can be created via any management interface, and these cnMatrix switches are fully managed switches. We have a COI, we have a web GUI, every feature is supported with an SNMP MIB, or we have our network management solution, which is cnMaestro. cnMaestro can run either on-premise or in the cloud. But using any one of those 4 management interfaces, you can create these policies. Now, the big advantage of creating it with cnMaestro is that cnMaestro is not a device manager. It's a system network manager. So when you create that policy in cnMaestro, it will push that policy down to all switches in your network. If you have one switch, great. If you have 100 switches, great. You push that same policy to all switches in your network. Okay, these policies are made up of 2 components. The first component of a policy is, how are you going to identify that device? So you plug in a video surveillance camera. How are you going to identify that it's a video surveillance camera of the type that you want this policy to match? So we have 2 ways of currently, we have 2 ways of matching devices, and we're always looking at more ways to do this. But LLDP is one. So link layer discovery protocol is a packet that is exchanged between the 2 devices, between the device and the switch, and vice versa. That packet is sent out every 30 seconds, and within that packet, there are a lot of little data snippets. So anyway, in our match criteria algorithm, we can look at any one of those data snippets and look for a specific piece of data or string that would identify that device. We can look at the system name field or the sysdescriptor field, and so on and so forth. The second match criteria mechanism is MAC information. So we can match on the MAC address as well. We can match an exact MAC address, or we can match a range of MAC addresses. Can be very, very handy. Or we can match on a MAC OUI, so a specific vendor's MAC address or manufacturer's MAC address. Now, once the first component, this match criteria, once you've identified how to match the device, it's very easy. I'll show you later. Now you say, what actions do you want to do? And there's all kinds of actions. There's VLAN settings, which includes, the native VLAN or the PVID. The egress tagging mode goes along with that. There's QoS settings you can do, security settings you can do. There's I have specifically listed here user priority bits, the switch port mode, the PoE priority, right? In our system, the PoE ports, you can list them as low, high, or critical, and I'll be demonstrating that actually in the demo later. And then port labeling. So port labeling is a feature. All switches support it. You can manually enter what you've connected to that port, like a printer. Port 10, there's a printer, or port 11, there's a video surveillance camera. This enables you to do that automatically. So when you plug something in, and you have your choice of where to get that information, but when you plug that device in, that field will automatically be populated. And when you remove the device, that field will automatically be emptied. So when you display your port tables, let's say you're displaying, 100 ports, which port is which. So this port field is very important. And the fact that that port field is now filled in automatically, I really think that's a key ease of use feature. Okay, moving on. So all this configuration that I'm talking about that is automated, that configuration is considered dynamic. So it will go away. So for example, if you pull the device out, if you disconnect the device, all the configuration that was associated with the policy that matched that device, that configuration will be removed. And I'm going to demonstrate that in today's demo. Okay, moving on. So this is a quick example for PVA. So let's say I'm going to connect a Wi-Fi access point to one of the ports, and in my example here, I say port 5. So I'm going to connect a Wi-Fi access point into port 5, and my Wi-Fi access point, it's going to advertise 3 SSIDs, employees, guests, and contractors. So those SSIDs are tied or bound to VLANs. So VLANs 40, 50, and 60 is the way the network admin set this up. Now, 40, 50, and 60, those VLANs have to be created on the switch. The port that you plug it into, port 5 in my example, that port needs to be made a member of those VLANs. The uplink port needs to be a member of those VLANs. The egress tagging mode has to be set correctly. The PVID has to be set correctly. So this is the example of what we want to do. And if I was to go and open up a telnet session, I could configure this pretty easily with COI commands. It's about 15, 20 COI commands. It's not that hard. I'm doing this specifically for port 5. And then if I wanted to plug in a second one, I would do this again for port, let's say port 10. I could plug in a second one. I'd have to do it for port 10. Now, this is how you would do it manually, and it's error prone, right? Typing in all these commands, it's error prone and it's time consuming. If you use the feature PVA, instead of these 10 or 15 commands, I'd replace it with the creation of a single policy. So here's a COI line, a COI command to create that policy. Now, after entering and creating that policy, now I can plug in this access point. But I don't have to plug it into port 5. I can plug it into any port I want. And then I can plug in a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth. And I don't need to do anything. I create this policy at the beginning of time, and now I can plug my devices into any port I want. Now, instead of using a COI command to create the policy, I could create it on cnMaestro. Then it would get pushed down to all the switches in my network. Now I can plug access points, as many as I want, into any port of any switch in my network. Okay, that's PVA for you. And let me quickly summarize. What is it for? It automates adds, moves, and changes of your network. It eliminates the error-prone and time-consuming manual configuration. That bullet right there, the second bullet, is probably the most important. I don't know if I believe this, but they do say that 80% of network problems are due to misconfigurations. Okay, every port is treated equally. A lot of people, nothing wrong with this. A lot of people, they'll hard configure their switch. Ports 1 through 4 are for access points, and ports 5 through 8 are for, I don't know, video surveillance cameras or something like that. You no longer have to do that. Every port is treated equally. You plug your device into any port you want. Okay, it definitely enhances the security of your network. You don't accidentally put the wrong device on the wrong VLAN or the wrong subnet. Little or no IT is needed for deploying these new devices. The IT team is super, super busy doing lots of things. This is one thing that they no longer have to worry about. Okay, overall, just to summarize, it reduces expenses and time that's required to deploy and manage your network. All right, let's move on to the exciting part here. I'm going to introduce, we talked about PVA, but now I'm going to fold it into the bigger picture, which includes cnMaestro. I'm going to onboard a cnMatrix switch and show you how easy that is, and show you how the initial configuration is done automatically. And then I'm also going to show you kind of moving away from the initial deployment of the switch and start showing you from a day-to-day operations point of view. I'm going to show you adding and removing devices and how that's automated as well. Okay, so kind of said this already, I'll say it again. The zero-touch experience, not only for initial deployment of the switch, but also for the day-to-day operations. The example that I'd like us all to think about as I talk through this is, let's say I want to do a network deployment at a stadium, and I'm going to have 25 switches, and in those switches, I'm going to plug in 200 video surveillance cameras and 200 Cambium cnPilot access points. Now, the reason why I have these two examples here is video surveillance cameras are third party. We don't make them here at Cambium. So I just want to show you that this can be used on Cambium equipment as well as non-Cambium equipment. So as we walk through the example, think about this example with 25 switches. In my example, I'm not going to have 25 switches. In my example, I'm going to have one switch. It's the cnMatrix EX2010P, which is 8 1-gig ports with 2 fiber uplink ports. I'm going to use one third-party video surveillance camera, not 200, and I do have 2 Cambium cnPilot access points that I'll use for my demo as well. Now, 3 simple steps to make all this happen. First step is, let's create a configuration file. So that configuration file can contain 2 things. It's all the static configuration that you want to do for the initial deployment of your switch. But in that configuration file, you'll also include one or more PVA policies. You'll develop a policy for each type of device you're going to connect into the network. So let's say you have 2 types of access points, an indoor access point and an outdoor access point. You can differentiate between those 2. You can have two policies, one for each. So anyway, you would create one or more policies, and that creation of the policy, you'd put that in your configuration file also. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to go to your cnMaestro account and open up your account, log in, and claim these switches. Now, I think I talk about this later, but the switches that you're claiming, you don't have to have those switches yet. All you have to do is know the serial number. So, you buy the switches, you get the serial numbers. The switches may not arrive for a couple weeks or a month or whatever, but that doesn't stop you. You can still do step 2. So you claim your switches using the serial number, and then you link the file that you created in step 1 to these claimed switches. Okay, step 3, and the final step, is when you do receive your switches, or when you're ready to deploy your network, you unbox your switches, you power them on, and you connect them to the network, and then you're done. You can simply just walk away. Everything else is automated. Because when you connect it to the network, you'll discover cnMaestro, the onboarding process will begin, you'll download that config file that you created. The config file will have all the initial configuration you want. It will also have the PVA policies, and you're ready to go. Okay, so let me dive into each one of those 3 steps a little bit deeper. So step 1 is to create the configuration file. And I've done that already. It's called cnMatrix John's Demo 3 or something like that. Now, this config file that you create, it can be as simple or as large as you want. For today's demo, I am doing one piece of static configuration. I'm going to create VLAN 10, and I'm going to make all of my copper ports a member of VLAN 10. The second thing in my configuration file is I'm going to include 2 PVA policies. And my 2 policies are as follows: one for the Wi-Fi access point, one for the video surveillance camera. On the access point, the first component of the policy I said is the matching or the rule. So I create a rule that says look at the LODP, and I'm using the any criteria, which means I look at any of those little data snippets, and I'm looking for a name. And in my example here, I just used the name pilot. So anyway, and then the rule for the third-party video surveillance camera, I'm using our Mac-based rule, and I'm specifically using the OUI of this third-party camera. The actions I'm taking, I just picked a couple here for examples for today. The PUE port priority, the default value is low. I'm going to change it to critical for the Wi-Fi access points, and I'm going to change it to high for the third-party video camera. The VLANs, I'm going to create VLANs 10, 20, 30, and 40 for the Wi-Fi access point, and for the video surveillance camera, I want all my video traffic on VLAN 500, and so I'm going to use VLAN 500 there. Okay, so that's step one. I'm going to create the config file, and as I told you, I've already written that, and the config file exists. Okay, step two, I open my cnMaestro account, I claim my devices, I link the configuration file from step one to those claimed devices, and then on the cnMaestro screen, you click the little field called approved, so you'll approve these devices, and I will give you a live demo of that. Okay, step three is connecting the switches. Now, I think I mentioned this earlier, but step three can be days, weeks, months after step two, right? So the point is you can get everything all set up, you can create your configuration, you can, architect your network and come up with what type of configuration you want. What VLANs do you want for your video surveillance traffic? What VLANs do you want for your different SSIDs? Things like that. So you create all that stuff, you get all ready, but when you eventually receive the switches, you simply unbox them, power on the switch, and then you connect the switch to the network. So these switches, I just want to, elaborate. The switches are fully defaulted. They're fresh out of the box. You do not have to pre-configure them at all. So truly zero touch. Now, when you do connect the switch to the network, this onboarding process with cnMaestro doesn't happen instantaneously. It does take a few minutes. So, and in our demo, we'll have to wait around a little bit, but it does take a few minutes. It does a DNS lookup. It has to reach out and discover the cloud, discover cnMaestro in the cloud. It has to establish the connection, and then it has to get the configuration file, and then it has to deploy the configuration file on the switch. And I'll demonstrate that. I'll demonstrate that the static configuration, VLAN 10, really does exist. Okay, and then after we've done all that, we are ready for our day-to-day operations. So then I'm also going to demo to you connecting devices and removing devices and moving devices. And we'll watch how the configuration automatically appears, automatically disappears, and then and so on and so forth. Okay, so for today's demo, I'm going to connect this one video surveillance camera, the 2 access points, and I am going to demonstrate the dynamic configuration that is the result of our PVA policies. Okay, it's time to go to our demo. Let's see if this is going to work for us. Okay, so I am now at my cnMaestro account, and I am at the onboarding page. Now, in the left-hand corner, there's an option called Claim Device. So before I do this, I'm going to do step one, which is create the configuration file. And for time purposes, I've already created that. I'll show you that in a minute. But step one is completed. We've created that config file. Step two is to claim the device. So I'm going to click on this Claim Device button. It brings up this little box here. And I'm going to enter my serial number. That's the serial number of my cnMatrix switch. And I'm going to hit the Claim Device button. And it was successful. It's very good. Okay, so now on my onboarding screen, you can see this switch here, and I am now going to hit this little pencil here for editing my configuration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the template, and I have a whole bunch of templates here for various purposes, but I'm going to go down at the very bottom. There's a template called cnMatrix John's Demo 3. Okay, I'm going to select that, and I'm going to hit Save. Okay, so now, Okay, so now I've claimed the device and I've linked the configuration file to the switch, and then I'm going to hit this approve button. So it's approved. Okay, so now we're done with step 2. We've created the configuration file in step 1. We've opened up our cnMaestro account. We've claimed our devices. You know, with a stadium deployment, that would be 25 switches. We only have one switch. But anyway, we've claimed the switch and we've linked the new config file to it. So now what I'm going to do is move on to step 3. So I take the box. So I have sitting here on my desk, you guys will have to trust me, it's a fully defaulted switch. I am going to power it up and connect it to the network. Okay, and it will take a little bit. It will take a couple minutes, I think. And hopefully everything works. So anyway, so let's go back to step 3 on the presentation. Let me just review it for you again. Okay, so step 3. So we've powered on the switch, we've connected it to the network. The switch was a fully defaulted switch. We're now waiting the 1 to 2 minutes. So after the switch does onboard, that means that the onboarding process is complete. That means it's gotten its configuration file. So in that config file, I statically created VLAN 10, and it should be a member of ports 1 through 8. So that's the first thing we'll check. Let's go back to our cnMaestro account. Okay, here we are. And okay, so the status of it is that it's onboarded. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my dashboard. Okay, so it's bringing up my dashboard slowly. Okay, in the upper right-hand side, so the uptime of the switch has, been 30 seconds or whatever. On this switch, you see that I have 10 ports here. These are the 8 1 gig copper ports and the 2 fiber uplink ports. I plugged my network connection into port 8. So port 8 is where I plugged in my network connection. And so if I hover over that port with my mouse, I'm going to see all kinds of information about the port. The third row says that the operational state is up, so on and so forth. But what I want to show you for today's demo is about halfway down. So the VLANs that exist on this port are VLANs 1, which is the default VLAN of the switch, but also VLAN 10, because we statically created that in the config file. I did not manually enter that. It was automatically done. So the onboarding process was complete. So if I look at port 7, again, you can see that it's halfway down this little pull up here. It's a member of VLAN 10 and 1. Look at port 5, port 3, port 1. Yeah, all ports are a member of VLAN 1 and VLAN 10. So step 3 is completed, and we're kind of done with this part of the demo, right? Step 1 was create the config file. Step 2 was to go to our cnMaestro account and claim it, link the config file to it. Step 3 was to connect the switch, and that's it. That's all we did, and now we have a switch that is up, it's on the network, and it's been statically configured with however much configuration you want. In our example here is only one item, VLAN 10. So now let's move to the part of the demo where I'm going to add devices to the network. So I have 3 devices here, 1 video surveillance camera. I have 2 access points, and I'm going to plug them into our switch, and I'm going to just plug them randomly into any ports here. Now, these devices are powered on via PoE, so we have to wait for the devices to power up. They got to, the software inside these devices have to initialize themselves, then they'll start sending out data, and that's when we can start applying our policies. So it takes a little bit. I'm going to refresh the screen. In the upper right-hand corner of the cnMaestro page, there's a little refresh button. And okay, so now I have plugged these 3 devices. You can see that ports 1, 3, and 5 are up. I'm not sure if the policies have been applied yet or not, but we can check. So port 1, what is port 1? Port 1 is my video surveillance camera. So I'm going to hover over that guy, and we can see that, yes, the policy has been applied. So if you go halfway down again to the VLANs row, you see that's a member of VLAN 10 and VLAN 1 still. That's good. 1 is the default VLAN, 10 has been statically created for us. But 500 is a part of the policy's actions. It detected that it was a video surveillance camera, and it created VLAN 500, and it made this port a member of VLAN 500. And it did all that automatically. It was fully automated. Now, if we go to ports 3, now port 3 is also linked up. Oh, let me go to port 1 again. Sorry, port 1. If you look a little bit further down the page, there's a row called PoE power priority. The default value is low, but the policy, if you remember our policy, it changed it to high. So sure enough, it's high there. Now, if we go to port 3 is our Wi-Fi access point. The policy has been activated, and you can see added the 3 VLANs we wanted it to, VLAN 20, 30, and 40. It's still a member of VLAN 10 and 1. And then if you go a couple rows farther down, the PoE power priority has been changed from low to critical. If you go to port 5, that's another Wi-Fi access point. Same thing. VLANs are 10, 1, 20, 30, and 40, and the PoE power priority is critical. Now I'm going to go to port 4, for example. There's nothing plugged into port 4, but I do want to show you the PoE power priority is at the default value of low. Now, if I go over to port 8, which is my network connection, we are going to see something interesting. Port 8, notice now port 8 is just a network connection. It's not, no policy is being applied to port 8, but port 8 is our uplink. And if it's the uplink port, and if we want traffic to flow through our switch correctly, it also has to be a member of those new VLANs. So it's a member of VLAN 10 and 1, the statically created VLAN 10, the default VLAN 1, but it's also a member of VLAN 500, so the video surveillance traffic can flow through the switch. It's also a member of VLANs 20, 30, and 40, so the wireless traffic can flow through the switch. And the PoE priority on this port, it's just a network uplink, so anyway, it's low. So anyway, fully automated, everything was configured correctly. So let me show you real quick. I am going to continue the demo. I'm just going to unplug the ports. And when you plug in ports, it takes a minute or so for the policies to take effect. When you unplug a port, the cleanup of that configuration is immediate. So let me hit the little refresh button. And there we go. So all the ports are down now. Let me hover over those ports. So port 1 was a member of VLAN 500. It no longer is. It's a member of the statically created VLAN 10 and VLAN 1. And also notice the PoE power priority has been changed from high back down to low. Port 3, same thing. Port 5, same thing. Port 8, it's no longer a member of all those VLANs, right? It's only a member of VLANs 10 and 1. So everything that I've shown you so far, there's no manual configuration. I don't have anyone hiding under the desk doing this for me. It's fully automated. I'm going to plug these 3 devices back in randomly into different ports. And we will see that no problem at all. One story I like to tell is, someone's walking through the wiring closet and he accidentally kicks out a cable. So he picks up the cable, he looks around, makes sure no one's watching, and he plugs it back in, and the port lights up, and the port provides power to that access point. So everybody's happy. However, he plugged it into the wrong port. It came out of port 3, and he accidentally plugged it back into port 5. So the wireless users will still attach and connect to that Wi-Fi access point. But because it's been plugged into the wrong port now, and under manual configuration, that wrong port will not be configured correctly, and the traffic will go nowhere, and all the wireless users will call the IT department and yell for help. With PVA, when that cable gets pulled out of one port and then accidentally plugged into another port, that's okay. PVA detects the device and does the right thing for that new port. So it works perfectly. Anyway, I just plugged everything in. I'm going to hit a refresh. Okay, so I plugged the 3 devices into ports 2, 4, and 7. Port 2 is our Wi-Fi access point, and this is, again, on VLANs 20, 30, 40. PoE power priority has been changed to critical. If I go to port 4 is our video surveillance camera. It was in port 1, I think, before, and now it's in port 4. Anyway, again, VLAN 500 has been automatically created. The PoE power priority has been changed to 5. And port 7, again, Wi-Fi access point, VLANs 20, 30, and 40 were automatically created. That port became a member of those VLANs, and the PoE power priority is critical. And then if I go back to port 8, where the network connection is, again, the right VLANs were added to that port to provide network connectivity. So that's kind of the end of my demo. Let me quickly summarize. So imagine that deployment we talked about in the network stadium. So I have 25 switches out there. You know, I connect those switches into the network. You know, the configuration file can be pushed down to all 25 switches. And then we take the, I forget what my example was, I think 200 video surveillance cameras and 200 access points. We take those 400 devices, and now we just plug them into any switch, any port of any switch, and boom, everything is configured for you automatically. No manual configuration required on these switches. No chances for errors to be made. Everything is very consistent across the whole configuration. So, you know, if it's one or two devices, it's kind of fun to show because the configuration appears and it disappears and automatically cleaned up, automatically configured. But when you think about larger deployments where you have 400 devices you need to plug in, this is a real time saver for deployment. Okay, so I think that summarizes the webinar for today. I would like to go to some Q&A. So Olivia, back to you.
Yeah. So Omar asks, what if it is not a fully defaulted switch that I want to apply a PVA on? Do I reset it before claiming it on cnMaestro, or would I just reuse my used switch with a new PVA for a new project with different setting requirements?
Yeah, you know, that's actually a really good question, and the answer is a little bit all over the place. So if the switch that you're using for this new deployment has a lot of configuration on it, and it was used in a different environment for something completely different, when we download our config files from cnMaestro, it doesn't first wipe out the config and then add that configuration. It's additive. So it takes the config in your config file and adds it to whatever the configuration is on the switch. So if you have some configuration on the switch already, and if that configuration has been saved to Flash, well, then it's going to be additive. And that there might be some configuration that conflicts. There might not be, right? You may want to keep that configuration. So it really depends on your given situation. But if you're starting fresh, new deployment, I would, you know, reset the switch to factory defaults, and then you would do exactly what I did in the demo. You just plug it in the network, and the config file would be downloaded.
That's all I'm seeing for questions right now. I'm not sure if anyone is still typing. Could they contact you with questions at your email?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Reach out to your Cambium contact, and they'll be able to get in touch with me, and we can do a live one-on-one session to go through more details if you would like. I thought there was one more question here.
Yeah, that was from Christopher, but it looks like he left. He was asking more about zero-touch provisioning that might be used for SM provisioning. He was wondering if there was discussion for zero-touch provisioning of SMs.
Yeah, you know, what I covered today was purely for configuration that's needed on the switch. For the different devices that you're plugging into the switch, it can be either Cambium devices like the SM he's talking about, or it can be third-party devices. But no, we don't, there's no configuration that we keep on the switch for those devices. Now, if it is a Cambium device, it can get its own configuration from cnMaestro. In the same way, right? So for the initial deployment, you know, that device will reach out to cnMaestro and get its initial configuration. So for that initial deployment, it can absolutely be thought of as zero touch as well.
Alex asks, how is the frequency control on the Cambium network?
I actually am not following this question. Alex, can you elaborate? I'm not sure if he's talking about some of the radios or not. Yeah, sorry, Alex, I'm not understanding your question.
All right, we'll give them a chance to elaborate on that.
Okay, thank you, Olivia.
Mhm,
So how do we do on time? Oh, good. 10 minutes left.
mhm. They entered another question saying, yes, on the radius device compared to other devices. Radio devices, I think, compared to other devices.
Well, so we have, and I might not be answering your specific question, but we do have Cambium Sync. And years back, we called it Canopy Sync. But anyway, today we have a GPS Cambium Sync that we use for the radios in let's say a WISP deployment or in some type of deployment that uses our fixed wireless technology. That's like we have a product called CMM5 that provides that GPS signal to the radios so that they can synchronize with each other. Today I'm talking about our enterprise switches, but we also have coming, you guys I'm sure have seen on my other presentations, I have a video surveillance switch coming out as well as a tower switches for WISP type of environments. And in the tower switches, we do provide this GPS Cambium sync. That's integrated into our switches. You connect up an antenna to our switch. You can also connect a CN Pulse device to our switch as well, one or the other or both as a redundancy. Anyway, we will take that 1 pulse per second sync and we will inductively couple that onto our Ethernet lines and send that up to the radios that are connected to our switch. So these tower switches are very full featured. It gives you the GPS sync signal. It also gives you all the different types of PoE that you need, not just standards-based 802.3 AFAT and BT power, which is what I've been talking about today. We also will support high power PoE for products like cnMedusa. The tower switches will also supply low voltage passive PoE power for some of the devices out there in the industry that use 24 volt type of PoE.
All right, that looks like it's about it for questions right now.
Okay, great.
All right.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Olivia, and thank you very much, everybody. And if you have any follow-on questions or would like to do a deeper dive or have another live demo, reach out to your Cambium contact and they'll get a hold of me and we can move forward with this.
All right, thanks, John. This recording and presentation will be made available on the Cambium Networks online community and on Cambium Networks YouTube channel. Thank you for joining and have a good day.